Yeah, I missed the beer on Friday because I was just like, I worked from home that day and I was just like, I don't know what classes it can add.
Yeah, it is pretty far. You're not in the office. It's like,
Did Lisanne make it out? Okay, cool. Yeah, she just left, started a new job.
Yeah, I didn't know. Yeah,
Where are you guys now?
I actually applied to that.
Oh, did you? Yeah. I think Tim did as well. So yeah. No, she's like that too, which is good.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just like kind of just like a skeleton crew left.
I'm still there.
Yeah.
Chris. Yeah. I was talking to Chris on vacation right now. I was talking to just like, it's like across the wall. I can't remember what the context was, but I was like, because I started taking over some stuff Lisanne was working on, and she was just like, "Are things okay? Like, you're not like stressed?" I'm like, "No, like things." She's like, "I don't want you to get stressed because like you can't leave. Like that would be really bad." I'm like, "Okay, like no, we'll quit on you." You know, my old manager works there. You know, Bill Miller. Bill. His last name is C-B-O-N-A-R.
Project manager?
Yeah, he was my co-op manager when I was a co-op.
Yeah.
Nice snake. Watch his bag.
It's like, we're gonna snacks in your room.
I'm gonna get some more. I had a coffee crisp. There we go.
The layout of this room.
Yeah.
This is a cool layout. It's like a little.
Yeah, I like that there's different styles of seating.
Yeah. Yeah, you can still kind of face one direction. It's not like a grid.
Snacks. So I was thinking, yeah, so have you been to a few of these meetups yourself?
I really liked it.
Okay, fine.
I actually kind of forgot about it because I was turning off notifications on my phone. It's my new thing I do. But like I started
I guess not that bad, but
Oh.
then you like made a broken leg or something. It's not bad. It's like a serious pain. I'm like, no.
Well, honestly, I had a really bad bruise where I pulled
Yeah.
an internal. Like,
I do it for fun.
even that.
I write documentation.
Crazy.
Right. For like,
How's
Like,
the,
it hurt a lot.
how's your knee? I haven't like
trying to get
seen
into
you
it.
since, like
I haven't.
The hard part is like
My knee's fine.
you're like, I can walk.
figuring out.
Yeah, my knee's fine. My
Say, for example, say the GNOME project,
sports medicine
like
doctor
figuring
said
out
it's
like
grade 2.
how to contribute what systems they use, getting to know their style guide pretty well.
Not that,
But like for my own little like programming projects, I like writing. Yeah, cool.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
posterior or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Looking for like, it's good to like
and so he
different
so great, so it's like
job
3 grade
fields.
or like 0 to 3.
Looking at
It's like 0 is like
C right now.
like
Yeah,
or 3 is like
but it's mostly like
so
when I first
like
got the job, I was
surgery.
gone for like was getting a lot of IT stuff because I was like specifically into like API documentation or like stuff like that. And so where it's not at all, it's like architecture stuff. And I'm cool with that, but I'm looking for stuff that's more close to my interest.
Like
yeah.
It's like shuddering.
yeah. Oh, poor guy. I know. I have to. He didn't even breakfast.
So where did you do your
Tim's gonna go check on him.
Is Goldsmith. They have like a postgraduate accelerator program course. So I took that after I graduated university, and that was April or May until August 30th, and then I got hired back on as casual until December.
Yeah.
Originally it was supposed to be they made like a new mandatory rule that you have to know French.
Oh, interesting.
So I have like 3 months till get business level French, and I don't think I'm trying. But we gotta do it on our own time.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's understandable. It's like they want to.
Yes, I missed them last week.
Yeah, they talked about it.
Right. Yeah, so for us, we would And then for any managers, I think it's same.
Okay.
Then I tried stand up.
I wish I could.
I don't
Yeah.
So like, we gotta get some letters.
Yeah.
So I need less O.
an ear for like IT related stuff.
Found a way.
I've heard it.
This-
So, yeah, I know that's,
There we go.
That's
like, this one for
Those cool though. At least I got like, they don't have like
I haven't seen it. That wasn't based on it. It looks fancy though.
they got boxes or position description.
Yeah, they still.
So
I think I don't know what data it was. Sometimes.
three of us got hired there. Depending on so like we're kind of like setting like
I live close to Tiny, so it doesn't matter.
great like my own style
The
guy.
L4
Yeah.
or L or
I was
I catch it
fun.
like
I was
Tiny
like
instead of myself.
I know, I thought I was
I
gonna
worked, like-
take it from work
I worked like
together.
overtime
Take
making
them out
that because
of
I
class.
had so much
You're like,
fun.
great.
Take them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I like
like
it was
for
fun.
now, a lot
Like
of
Michigan and
people.
Hey guys, how do you feel there?
Like, oh my god.
Like
I think
one of them ones was like I was like, hey guys, how do you feel there?
But I think like right now it's like I kind of still just feeling like we're offering.
And they're like, yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, people
So
don't
it's
like the trees.
we had
People in Ottawa are very
mechanics, so that people were like,
I don't have to, but I get
that's
fucking
not
up
their main focus. And so they don't have to deal with stuff like
Yeah, it's
that.
like you have a nice couple of students or something. Like you have to get out of your cram with
They like walk
the tree. It's like the rest
Yeah.
of it.
Well, I grew up in Barhaven. I remember taking like the bus to like Ottawa.
Yeah, it can be funny too if you're say you're reviewing someone else's work and you make
Suggestions.
suggestions.
Yeah.
So I could just
Why
like
are we
bus
doing it
and
that
train
way?
instead.
And you're like, oh, because it's in the style guide, you know, naturally. Meanwhile, it's you just put through.
Yeah, actually, yeah, a few times I'm like, you know what? I have a period at the end of all the sections bullet points.
It's
Okay.
actually
And then after a while, it started bothering me. And then I was like,
Yeah.
no.
Oh, yeah, my cousin used it.
Okay, maybe commas if it's part of a sentence. I was like, okay, no, this is what it
Now they're like,
Right, let's just keep it capital and no periods at the end of this, because I eventually started like really odd when we had really
Oh, okay.
complicated lists.
it's actually
Say,
kind of
like,
close to
requirements and the government.
Yeah, my old company.
And it's like little things like that are really fun. You're like, okay, I'm gonna try that. And now it's
Well,
more so
on like a driver's like a
it's
building and
fun
it's
to
like
see that, like,
maybe they
process to
My
kind
company had like the big logo in the building, and like when I started there, they were already like stock was dropping, and then at one time, I was like reading like it was the Ottawa Business whatever, and it's like Dragon Wave stock is collapsing,
You're
like
really,
going with I'm like, is there still people there? Like, and I'm like,
so starting for co-op.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that May is the future tense of might, and might is used as okay. I had never known that. Just like,
close to hockey sushi.
Yo,
I
like,
know. It's so weird.
No,
I saw
Apparently that's
saw a hockey like when we were driving to Peterborough. I wanted to stop and I was like, this isn't real. Yeah, this isn't real. And then now I have one here.
Yeah. So
And apparently
I have a
really
membership
good.
card. Yeah.
Do they call them pucks? And,
They don't. They should. They should like have people on skates like go around.
or they should set up the like the hot sticks. Hockey stick.
The only thing hockey is that the fun for like nothing else.
I know.
The inside looks like yeah, it's like marketing.
Like Canadian, like hockey. Yeah, there we go.
We're
We're in.
it's just like a 905.
English language or like that.
Because with my old job, because I used to build stuff, like it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And then like now that we're
Yeah.
like at IFS, like
There was
the last time we
August
did,
is like
and I had enough.
but there's at one point
So a while I checked.
when it came to power, people wanted to like separate like working class from like family. So the people who were literate started adding extra letters in to make it look fancy.
There's
To
like
kind of
that
keep that separation, and that's how we got like weird like
if you want to like do that, and it was just before that. So like
there was stuff learning there stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know, like did you ever work at Albert? I don't remember what buddy was doing.
Yeah, it's actually.
Yeah,
It was my.
he's like, he's okay because like, what do you order? Okay, he's like, I'll put down like 100 and I'm like, dude, like, I just like dummies like 30 which is good because you always need like one person. Tap it out early.
Oh, all you can eat places? Yeah, you have to go with like.
Trying to get that before December.
Yeah, or else you get that one
You need
person who's like, oops, they ordered another sheet.
You
Come
need to
on.
like get your friends to show up and share.
I didn't know it was 6 by. I thought it was
That it's impossible. Yeah, it's more like. That would be like.
Yeah, Albert's still
there. It's just a grind. Try and get French. It's not up by 90 days.
So basically, yeah, like what I went with using it as a way to make sure it's basically telling you all the
Yeah, pretty much. It's weird. I mean, because I didn't start much.
Like if you ask me how to say like, sit down.
I don't really have much of a
I don't
history.
think I would know how to say that. Right?
I'm just happy I'm in job. Everyone's talking about good to me. That's English for it.
I think it's pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a lot of people have gone.
Mentioned
to you
I think
Public procurement.
Domenico, I don't think
Public services.
no, I think she got it.
Okay.
It's the name for.
I was with her after work, sending her this listing and she was interested, but she's like, I just got that. I'm sure
It's in the.
I think I went in the year just like trying engineering units. So because like y'all they're
Writing like.
Oh, maybe, yeah. They were spamming, like Telvin was like putting stuff. And then I went to check the posting, it was like gone. So I emailed my manager, I was like, hey, like, did you hire someone? And he's like, no, we took it down, like the organization
But
still
it's
decided
actually
like
pretty cool. Like again, I
make a sale.
Get your act
Yeah, make a
together.
sale.
they're using like modeling software, which
Yes, I don't know.
I've lived in most ones, so.
it kind of like syncs like
That's how it
Yeah,
works.
because Ali was
of the buildings and
a lot of time he wasn't sure if he was gonna
they kind of
find a job right away, but
like schedules and looking at everything out, like it's like not there, organized like CRM management. Like you basically do anything like manage types, so you can for example, if you want, you could put on like a virtuality set videos, you're gonna say like better
Yeah.
you can teach
Yes, we
you can swipe it and it'll tell you if it's in a class or not.
Oh, man.
And like right there, you can just like hit order and it'll send you an order. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
They're at the
how it all syncs,
door.
but
You signed
Oh,
an
yeah.
NDA. I think that they were like kind of running slow because mine was like one of 3 left.
So everyone will be like, make sure you're prepared.
This is
I'm just
so
thinking of it has a.
Ontario is not good for it, but
Oh, I like the word. Like this.
No, yeah, I was
Down
worried about that too. I was like, oh, I'm super late. That like just got here just
it's
really
bad, but I
short.
know
There must be something
I want to buy
But I guess everybody's late or.
they're using
Actually, yeah.
Yeah.
I have one.
Yeah.
The last one I went to was like.
I'm not sure how it's
Quiet. There's probably like.
but I don't know if that's pressure.
Yeah, 50 signed up.
So, but more like it's like
Oh my God.
standards or like things
Because I get it.
Just come, just show up. I guess there's really nothing stopping you. So I don't
That's what's really quickly.
We're layers.
I don't know.
My name is.
Hi.
A serious conference.
They're all late.
Hi, Shayna.
They have some set up, like knocking over.
Nope. Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yeah, somebody.
Downside, I think.
I was like by myself.
So if that goes down.
So you guys work together. Where you work?
So that's
Somebody called Ride Share.
But if
Yeah.
Ride Shark.
Ride Shark.
Model with the light on.
Sounds very
You have to guess
violent.
what we can, you have to guess what we do.
So if someone in the building
From that
turns it off.
Well, maybe that's why it would be fun to.
Well, I'm assuming it's
A
like
lot
a
of places are a lot
that
Really
doesn't
great.
seem.
Not too far off, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's, we do that for.
Oh.
Hey guys,
White labeled card.
how's it going? good to see you all again. And for those of you that are some new faces, welcome to our meetup. We've been doing this. Yeah, we're called Write the Docs. If you didn't know, we've been doing this since 2018, Shopify, getting together pretty much every month if we can, with a few breaks, and talking about documentation and all things documentarian. So it's been fun. I've got a little bit of information about that later on in this presentation. We've got a Twitter on social. We've got a Twitter. We've got a handle on social media too. If you'd like to follow us, you can get your Wi-Fi if you'd like to at Shopify Guest with that password. Welcome to Shopify. And if you'd like to go to the bathroom, they're just at that door that you came in by the elevators. There is a fob over here, I believe. Yeah, this thing right here. That'll kind of buzz you in and out from the door because it locks. It'll lock after you if not. Or one of the friendly shop folk will let you in if you don't have it, let you in and out. Yeah, so I guess it's been about a year that we've been doing this. I'm just realizing that as I'm reading this. Pat, one of my great colleagues, Pat DePap, you probably met outside, he prepared these slides. So wow, has it really been a year already? So this started out as a gathering in a bar for the first little while, and then we started up at Shopify. May of 2018, and we've been growing at a pretty steady clip ever since. So thanks a lot to all of you guys for making that happen and coming out to these things every month. It's really great. So a little round of applause, I think. I think we're probably the fastest growing Write the Docs meetup in the world, and probably one of the largest ones too, if not maybe the largest one. So I think that's pretty neat. We record these things and put them up on our YouTube channel, unless anybody has like a, if anyone would not like us to do that. So yeah, it becomes a resource for the broader Write the Docs community to access some of the things that we talk about here. Sometimes we have remote speakers as well that will join us and present remotely. So that's been kind of interesting. And we've been trying out this remote meetup link as well. And I noticed, Rachel, that you have joined that. So hopefully, well, you're still here with us. So I'm imagining that you can hear us and see us. I wonder if I can unmute you here. Let's see what happens if I try that. Yeah, loud and clear. Okay, cool. I was gonna unmute you, but we got your message and stuff. So unless you want to, communicate by voice, but if you're happy to communicate by voice, by chat messages, that's cool too. Whatever you prefer. But yeah, so hopefully the remote experience of this is great. And if you have any feedback for us, Rachel, please don't hesitate to provide it to us after. Maybe you could use the meetup site for that. Yeah, so while we were on hiatus, hiatus for the summer. It's been a few months. We actually crested 500 in our membership, which I thought was kind of a cool milestone. So I'm pretty excited about that. So thanks again for all the new faces for being part of that and helping us grow the meetup. All right, what happens next? Okay, now we get into the good stuff. Rory Tanner, we have wonderful Rory Tanner. Well, I'm biased. I've been working with Rory for years, ever since I pretty much started up at Shopify. Rory was my lead. Rory and I started working on API docs together and slowly started to build that into a team over the last couple of years. I've gotten a lot out of the experience. What does it say here? Well, Rory is a technical writer and editor at Shopify. He's been doing that since 2015, and before that, he taught courses in rhetoric, literature, and composition at the University of Ottawa and at Algonquin College. So let's hear it for Mr. Rory Tanner. Of course, now is when I decide that I'll check my Slack messages to see if Rory sent me his presentation.
Which I did.
Oh man. Oh, I practiced so hard for this. Okay. Okay, cool. So that's there. So now, this one should not be presenting anymore. No, don't look at that one. Spoiler alert. And now this one will go into presentation mode. And Rory can see his notes here, and you can't see them there, which is good. I like this. You feeling good?
I'm feeling good.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks, Andrew.
One more time for Rory.
Thank you so much, everybody. No, and thanks to Andrew for asking me to join the meetup and give a presentation. I've worked, like he said, I've worked with Andrew for a couple years now, and it's been fun. So I'm Rory. This is my talk. And when Andrew asked it, if I'd be interested in presenting something tonight with the theme of writing and editing, I'll confess I was a little bit excited. I just love thinking about this stuff. And my academic background is in language and English, and so this is kind of my jam. So this is going to be a super focused talk on point. I'm going to hopefully run through a few different kind of mental models or paradigms that I've found helpful as a writer, as an editor. And just think about, in general, kind of the expectations of the role of the editor and how we can challenge some of them in our own work, whether we're editing someone else's writing or editing our own. And it's kind of a fun time, I think, to be, never not a fun time, to be into style guides and English language. But no, maybe especially fun. These two books, I believe, published in the past year, basically, well, one of them is a style guide, Dreyer's English. Another is kind of like a language reference to how linguistics are evolving in the internet age. Pretty nerdy stuff, and yet it's cracking the New York Times bestsellers list. So it's encouraging to me a little bit to think that maybe it's not just us here in the room who are kind of into this thing of nerding out about language. So I'll start with a bit of a stereotype of what the editor is like. The editor wielding their red pen, slashing and burning your precious first drafts. The idea that they improve your work by removing everything that's kind of extra or extraneous, removing everything that gets in the way. I won't read this, but I just love that first line. The editor's secret weapon is the delete button. It reminds me of that story about someone asking a sculptor, well, how do you do it? What's your secret? And they say, well, I just take a block of marble and I remove everything that isn't the sculpture, which is kind of a bit of a smart aleck response, but I can see it. Remove to improve. And as I was working as a teacher, I think my GIF is out of sync here. There's this idea of remove to improve, and it's a principle from information design too, if you're designing tables or UIs, but where you kind of strip away elements that are a little bit extra. They just like the noise that gets in the way of your signal. And this is a way of improving the content itself. I mean, I can let this play for a little while here, but you probably get the idea. Remove to improve. I mean, Macho Man Randy Savage, when was the last time we were thinking about him?
Are those all wrestlers? Thanks.
Yeah, all the wrestlers.
Awesome.
So remove to improve, concept from information design. But how does it work for editors? How do we apply that to our own work? What do we remove? What should we keep? Sometimes it's not as easy as we might think as answering this terrific question. Does it spark joy? Sometimes maybe it is easy. I'm sure as writers and editors, we have like a naughty list of words or phrases that we tend to avoid because they're too long, too much noise. They interfere with the signal. And so we have the nice tighter replacements. Instead of applies pressure, we say pushes. So maybe in those cases, yes, it is easy to tell whether or not it sparks joy. Maybe for some of us, a word like utilize does spark joy. I'm not here to judge, but it's on my naughty list for what it's worth. Vocabulary aside, sometimes you do just know as a tech writer that you're adding too much context or too much content for the reader to manage. And yeah, we can probably agree that in a lot of cases, a doc would be improved by removing things like information that isn't really crucial to the task completion. We think like traditional tech writing, the doc would be improved if we remove edge cases that aren't really relevant to most readers, but we're presenting to most readers. They have to wade through to get to the content and so on. Maybe sometimes through the way that documentation evolves, there's a bunch of information that should actually be in a totally different doc. It doesn't belong here at all. So yeah, maybe in those cases it is simple, but I'm sure we've seen the opposite too. A case where an editor or writer has removed too much context and they kind of leaving the reader, leaving them hanging a bit. Maybe it's done in the name of making things shorter or making things more concise. Sometimes the motivation is to save translation costs. So it can be an idea that we just remove as many words as we can, and therefore the bill is not as heavy. So again, how do we know? What do we remove? What do we keep? So for the rest of this talk, I'll talk about a couple mental models that we can use that have helped me just feel a little more confident in knowing what to remove and what to keep or add to texts under review. So we can start maybe by stepping back. Who are we editing for as editors? Yes, we're editing for the benefit of users of these documents, readers with hopes and dreams, readers with user goals perhaps, but we're also editing at a more basic level for human brains. And I just can't get over this quotation. I love this idea of language is kind of like brain code. So let's think about that for a little bit. How can this approach help us understand editing, this idea of language as brain code? First, we need to think about how processing actually works. And now I'm not a real doctor, but here's some things I've read about. How does reading even work? Syntax apparently is really important, the order and the word choice in a sentence. And then ambiguity really slows down processing time. So if we think of ourselves as creating content that's going to be read by humans with brains, ambiguity, we got to get rid of that. It slows the processing down. And human brains are great at resolving ambiguity, but that doesn't give us an excuse to put it there. If we can avoid it, why not? So I'd like to focus on a really specific part or a type of ambiguity, which is called temporary ambiguity. So it's part of sentence processing where there isn't like a grammatical error, but the structure of the sentence causes the reader to pause. And this is a great example here. We can start reading the sentence. If we imagine how the sentence kind of happens in slow motion, the defendant examined. So right away we're thinking, okay, who's doing the examining? It's the defendant. But no, once we finish the sentence, we realize it's actually the lawyer who's doing the examining. So this is temporary ambiguity, which we can resolve, not by removing, but by adding. So in this case, the editor adds value by adding actual words. So take that, Marie Kondo, I guess. We're not removing, but we're adding. And I'll run through another quick example here too. And I know there's a few people here who I have the pleasure of working with at Shopify. You're well familiar with my edits and your content about this. Conditional statements, the idea of having an if at the start of a sentence that kind of raises the question, well, then what? So note the basic structure here. There's two parts to the sentence, right? There's the condition in yellow and then the outcome in green. So like in the previous example, there's a bit of temporary ambiguity here. But it's really slight. But it comes in the form of, well, the brain has to kind of figure out which part is the condition and which part is the outcome. And when I read it out loud, there's no doubt. If you need help, read the docs, because like the tone of my voice is framing those two as separate. But on the page, it's not as clear. So again, if we think of the sentence unfolding in slow motion, there's potential for the processing brain to kind of read those two, the purple elements now. It's like a series. Rather than the separate as part of the condition and the outcome. Of course, by the end of the sentence, the brain can figure it out, right? Okay, this is the outcome. Again, brains are great at resolving ambiguity, but in some cases we can avoid it altogether, and it's a simple solution of adding then. So it's like an architectural feature that defines the condition and the outcome. You can see how a zealous editor would say, well, we don't really need that word. A lot of these are maybe syntactic cues, I think is the word, the technical term for them. Then that, a lot of them get removed just because it seems like they're not really necessary. But I guess this is me making a humble appeal to say, well, wait a minute, maybe we need to pump the brakes and think about, as editors, maybe we do need to add them in for the sake of sentence processing. Does it matter? At the end of the day, as I say, the brain can resolve the ambiguity. But what if you imagine you're communicating with a very large audience? Say you're writing within a doc set that has, I don't know, years of person hours spent reading that content every year. In that case, little gains like this, optimizations, can actually add up to like save time for your user base. And we've done some testing at Shopify along this line, and it's kind of neat to see the suggestions of processing gains. And when you roll it out by the number of users for the documentation, it starts to make a tiny bit of sense. This next sentence, I'll just breeze through this real quick, but it shows you how if you extend it, the problem gets a little, it just gets a little more shaky. So here we have a potential series. Let me see if I can, got that? Yeah. So if you need help, read the docs or call support. Again, tone of voice makes that clear. But on the page, this could just be the start of a longer sentence as the processing brain is chunking through it word by word. If you need help, read the docs or call support, then you're probably not an advanced user, right? We see how the sentence could take a left turn. So again, if we pop that little word in, little cue, we can just settle it right up front. So again, a tiny thing, but does it add up over the long term when you're scaling up your audience? Potentially. So language is brain code. Every sentence kind of has a user journey, and as editors, we sometimes we have to add to improve, not just remove. So what next? We can theorize that maybe brains really don't like ambiguity, even though they're not bad at resolving it. What do brains like, though? Let's flip this around from a positive perspective. I'm going to go with stories. Brains like stories, and I'm sure there's lots of like pop psychology articles that you could find with a quick Google that say how the use of storytelling increases comprehension and retention and all this other kind of brainy stuff. So as editors, what can we do if we're editing for human brains to leverage the power of stories? What can we add or remove? So let's talk a little bit about Red Riding Hood. So here are two parallel examples. They're taken from a great book called Style, The Basics of Clarity and Grace. And this bit of the text really kind of changed the way that I think about paragraphs, which I realize is like probably the most nerdy thing I've said in public. So pardon me, changed the way I think about paragraphs. So why does one of these work and the other not? I mean, we could take a second to read it, I guess. But what it comes down to is this idea of characters. Who are the main characters? If we think of each of these as like a story or part of a story, who are the main characters? And in grammatical terms, we can think of like a subject. The subject of a sentence is like the main character. So look at the first one, again, using this purple color. The subject is a walk through the woods. Second subject, the wolf's jump. So these are really kind of abstract subjects. They're not terribly relatable or vivid. In the second example, the subjects are totally different. And I think it's clear they have more traction. Little Red Riding Hood was walking through the woods. How different that is than a walk through the woods was taking place on the part of Little Red Riding Hood. And of course, that's over the top, but it's an illustration. And again, the wolf jumps out. Suddenly we have traction. So every sentence like this is like a story waiting to happen. And if brains like stories, then as editors and writers, we would want to make solid, kind of clear characters using like concrete, vivid subjects. So let's zoom out one more level. This is a wall of text, and like in presenting 101, they say don't do walls of text. So sorry, but here's the thing. So now we've got this idea. So brains like stories. Choose good characters, but then like stick with a character. And so if we think of a paragraph like this, look at all the different grammatical subjects. Look at all the different characters, to put it differently. Analysts, decisions, employees, the success of this kind of manager. What a ridiculous subject. The opposite type, manager. So it's just all over the map. And you can see where I'm going with this. Sorry if I'm belaboring it. But what do we have here? A totally different story. It's consistent use of the grammatical subjects in the paragraph, So suddenly, it again has traction. It will be easier to parse, easier to understand, probably easier to remember. And of course, we don't have much time to read through these, but the feel of a paragraph like this, it just sings compared to the other one. Again, we have a great character, modern managers. It's relatable. It's a human. It's a person. So by default, we're going to connect with it, and then we just stick with it through the paragraph. So what are we removing here? This is like the galaxy brain moment in the presentation. We're not removing words, but we're removing grammatical subjects to create a single consistent subject in the paragraph. So that's about it, Andrew. I'm at time, 15 minutes.
Wow.
These are the kind of the mental models that I've found helpful over the years. Remove to improve, but not always. Language is like brain code. And so because of that, we can think of every sentence having like a user journey. And then tell better stories to make your readers' brains happy. So choose good main characters and then like stick with them as much as you can as you're building out paragraphs and I guess even like documents as a whole. But that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Rory, I was wondering if there's one more thing we could ask of you, and that is if there's any questions from the room. If you wouldn't be opposed to fielding a few questions or comments or
field questions.
Yeah, feel free if there's anything you'd like to talk to Rory.
And I can keep an eye on the screen if our colleague Rachel has a question that she wants to do as well. But happy to take questions at the end, or even if you want to chat after. Anything coming to mind? Yes. Please.
At one point, you talked about removing edge cases. What, in your opinion, would be the best way to document edge cases? Because sometimes you're looking personally for a code solution, and I'm like, I know someone has figured this out before, but it might not be me.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer for this, but I do have an answer. Recently, we were documenting an API change in release notes, but there was also like a parallel API reference doc. And so there's this little edge case that it was introduced with a new API version. I see Pat grinning here. He shares my pain with this. And so the question is, do we add this little edge case? It was like something would break if you had this version of, I don't know, Ruby or something. And so in the end, we just put it in the API release notes, but we didn't add that minor edge case to the main reference doc for that resource. So the information is there in documentation, but it's not duplicated in like the main event doc that all the developers would be using. But it's still there somewhere in the release notes, which is kind of when the edge case was introduced. So I don't know. That's what we did in that case, but it's a good question. Because there could be an edge case, something that would cause support debt for a small number of customers. But how small is too small, right? Because you don't want to prevent more support debt by making it harder for the rest of them to find the right answers. If we're just imagining kind of like a perfect world where people read the documentation, so, which I think we're allowed to do here. Is that right, Andrew? Yeah.
Oh, everybody reads documentation. Yeah, that's a really good question, and it actually got me thinking about this thing that I keep coming back to recently, which is progressive information disclosure, which kind of sounds, I don't know, fancy or something, but I think all it really means, to go back to what Rory's talking about, is that you sort of like tell a good story. And so I sometimes when I'm documenting a feature, I think about like, well, I want to show them the kind of like happy path first through the process, and then I can get to some of the more like thorny things like later on the page. That kind of helps me to structure my documentation if I think of it in that way. So I don't know if that like applies to what you were thinking, but I don't know if your code is talking.
Everything does. Everything does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, or we good to keep moving? Sure. As I say, I'll be around a little bit after, so if you want to chat, you're welcome.
I love that part where you showed the like really convoluted sentence, and then also, did I give you permission to take all that stuff out of my work? All those examples?
We can talk about it.
Yeah, active voice and passive voice. It's a problem for me. Yeah, no, I love that example of the like one that where the subjects were the wrong kind of subjects, and then you flip them around, and it just flowed so nicely. I just loved it. Okay, so Christopher, you've joined us, I think, right? So that means that I think you can share your presentation, right? So Rory's no longer presenting, and I will stop presenting, and then you can start presenting, and I will go to your slide in here because it has a description of who you are. Cool. Do you want to come up here and then, oh, there it is. Okay, awesome. This is going great. I feel like we should start doing rehearsals for these things. Okay, so it's my great pleasure to have Christopher with us. Christopher has been a kind of a rock on the docs team for a while, and has been somebody that I've kind of seen as being one of the go-to people for editing on our team, along with Rory. And so it was I was really thrilled when I reached out to Christopher and he agreed to come here to talk to us a little bit about writing. Christopher also has been sharing some of his thoughts about writing and different techniques and things on Medium. So there's some really good blog posts on Medium that are out there that I would encourage you to seek out. And so here's what it says. Christopher is a writer and an editor with a long career in the high-tech industry, including positions at Adobe and IBM. He has created and edited a wide range of content for the Shopify Help Center, and recently switched roles to focus on content that provides context and guidance to Shopify's internal developer community. So that's, what's the name of that team?
It's called Dev Context.
Dev Context, cool. So you're writing like internal docs for developers at Shopify. So of course we're sad to see Christopher go, but obviously we wish him well in his new role and new adventures and learnings await, I'm sure. So without further ado, let's hear it for Christopher.
Thank you. I'll first apologize for my voice. I'm just getting off a cold, so I might be a little raspy. Okay, so most of us here, I think, are content creators. And as we are creating content, we're thinking about all kinds of things. The type of content we're creating, the style we're going to use, the voice and tone, all kinds of things of that nature. But I'd like to suggest that we should also be thinking a lot about examples and what they can bring to our content. And of course, bringing them to the content, bringing them to the reader of the content. So I'm going to propose that the phrase, for example, and similar phrases, is one of the most useful phrases that we can actually use in our content. But we'll first digress a little bit. What do we have here? Any takes?
Is it an album cover?
It's not an album cover.
It looks like Pink Floyd or something. Ringing a bell.
Okay, I think that perhaps the simple answer is, well, that's a cow, right? And I would agree. On first sight, I would also say that is a cow. But what about, say, the farmer who owns that cow? How might the farmer refer to that thing on the screen?
Betsy.
Yes, could use the name of that individual. Or the farmer might say, well, that's my livelihood. So we've already introduced 3 different terms for basically the same thing from slightly different perspectives. By the way, that's actually a Guernsey cow, if you're interested in the exact breed. So what we're talking about here is something called the ladder of abstraction. And just sort of as a theoretical background to that, the ladder is something that I first learned about in a book that goes way back to the 1940s by a writer called S.I. Hayakawa. And he wrote a book called Language and Thought and Action, where he introduces the ladder of abstraction. He was mainly talking about it in terms of political discourse and things of that nature, but the concept applies widely in pretty much any domain, including this one. So as you can see in this particular picture, we have all these different rungs, and the cow is on there around midway, and you see the different labels that are applied at each level of the ladder. So we talked about cow, Bessie. If we look at it a little more abstract, it's livestock or farm assets. And if you think really high up, you can talk about, well, wealth as an abstract concept referring to that cow. So this is very similar in some senses to just sort of classifying objects or the notion of containment. Similarly, if you're familiar with something like unified modeling language, where you define objects and then you have them specialized, it's sort of parallel kind of construction to this. But I think that the latter is particularly useful when thinking about examples in our content. Let's look at one different, or maybe two different ideas here before we get into some more details. So if we just talk about some abstract term like communication, that's extremely broad. It could include writing stuff, maybe journalism, magazines or websites, blog posts, talking, doing presentations, all that fits under communication. So it's a very abstract concept. If we narrow that down to something like just stories, well, now we've narrowed it down. We've gone a level lower on that rung, or on a rung. Let's get this right. A rung lower on the ladder. And then, of course, we have just particular types of stories, such as ones that you might find in books, say novels. We could then think about, well, just a particular type of novel that happens to have won a prize. We could talk about maybe just To Kill a Mockingbird, famous novel. Or you could talk about your particular copy that you've read many times of that novel. So we could talk about all these different levels, and we're, in one sense, talking about the same thing. But the terms we use at each rung are completely different. And the ways we talk about it are going to be totally different. If I talk about just books as a concept, I'm not going to be talking in the same way as if I'm talking about my personal copy, which I can feel and touch and so tangible. And you can even look lower. Well, the book's actually just made of paper and ink, or you can think even lower that it's molecules and chemicals and stuff like that. Another example I wanted to talk about is something that I'm familiar with because I happen to work at Shopify. So we'll look at it from a different perspective of writers or technical writers at Shopify. So the motto or the logo of Shopify is to make commerce better for everyone. So at a very high level, all the writers here, Rory, Andrew, and myself, we're all trying to do that. But that's a very abstract concept. And what does that really mean? Well, maybe if we get a little more specific, a little more concrete, we're talking about providing guidance to business owners on your e-commerce journey or language of that nature. Or we could be just talking about, well, like developing knowledge articles or help topics for the help center. Or at a very low level, maybe we're just, doing our day-to-day chores, typing commands and fighting with sentences and dealing with editorial comments and all that. All that is still trying to make commerce better for everyone. So same thing I'm talking about, but all at different levels of abstraction, and the words and language used are different at all those levels. So we're going from the abstract to the concrete. And I've talked about it as a ladder. I think it's also important to note that it's not really a ladder. There aren't these fixed rungs. It's a spectrum. So there's a range between all those levels, an infinite range, I would say. But as we create our content, I think it really helps to go to the concrete. Abstract notions are sometimes difficult to comprehend. Just as when I was trying to explain, well, what's communication all about? And I listed all these different things. And it was sort of just, well, all airy-fairy. Whereas if I talk about, that specific copy of a book, it's very tangible. I can recognize it, I can touch it and feel it. This is sort of another example or another way of looking at this. This is from Steven Pinker's book, A Sense of Style, which you might be familiar with. And it's totally different from those other ones I talked about. I'll just read this, it's kind of small. But he gives this as an example of sort of an abstract paragraph or an abstract sentence. So Georgia O'Keeffe called some of her works equivalents because their forms were abstracted in a way that gave the emotional parallel of the source experience. Well, I remember when I read that for the first time, I had to sort of stop and say, what the heck? After reading it a few times, I kind of got it. But I think someone maybe who works at the art gallery or who has studied art, maybe would just read that and say, oh, that's perfectly fine. But compare that to this second example. Georgia O'Keeffe's landscapes were of angular skyscrapers and neon thoroughfares, but mostly of the bleached bones, desert shadows, and weathered crosses of rural New Mexico. So two sentences kind of saying the same thing. The second one using all these very concrete, very specific things, phrases and words. And I think it really resonates. Whereas for me anyway, the first one is just sort of this abstract, almost sort of cold description. Won't apply to everybody, but that's the way I saw that one. And then just for another extract from a book. This is from the Developing Quality Technical Information book that IBM has put out. I think it's in the 3rd edition now. And we won't read all that. But the last bit says that good writers look for ways to make abstract information more concrete. So how can we go about doing that? I suggest we do that in various ways, but we'll focus on examples. Let's look at some inline examples that can take us from the abstract to the concrete. I should note that these are examples, they're real-life examples from the Shopify Help Center. They're not necessarily the best examples. They're not necessarily models to follow. I just paged through and found some and used them in this presentation. I think I created some of them. Other writers here might have created some of them. But they're really just to demonstrate my notion here. So this very first one is a topic where we're talking about products. We're introducing the whole concept of topics. And the very first line says, your products are the goods, digital downloads, services, and gift cards that you sell. So in this sort of metaphor or way of looking at things, I'm calling that an inline example. So we're kind of defining products as being these more specific things. And hopefully to a merchant, those would be more readily understood. Whereas just the concept of product is a little bit vague and abstract. When they read that bit about, oh, digital downloads and gift cards, that sort of enlivens it and makes it real, what they can actually create and use this feature for. Here's another example that is a feature that happens to display in real time where sales are taking place on a map, a global map. And it says, well, you can use this feature called Live View, so and so on. And it's especially useful during high traffic periods, such as Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So here again, I would call this an inline example, because what we've done, what the author did here was say, well, we're going to use the abstract term of high traffic periods, and then make that more concrete by giving a little example, such as Black Friday and Cyber Monday. If that wasn't there, the meaning would probably still be there, but some readers would have to think after reading. It's especially useful during high traffic periods. They might have to, pause and think about that. Relating back to Rory's presentation, where, well, do you really want your readers to be pausing and having to think about things? So this just gives that example in concrete terms. And another final example of inline. The last slide talks about selling things at a mobile location. And again, that could be very abstract. People might not really know, well, what does a mobile location really mean? And here the inline text says, well, it's such as at a fair, pop-up, or market. Again, more tangible things that they might relate to and understand the concept more directly. Oops, I'll add one more example. This is one that I'm sure you already use, and it's very direct. This one in a table of some sort, and it's describing what this particular field is, and if you have to enter a value there, it gives, well, for example, for a weight of this, enter this value. Now here it's actually kind of important because you don't actually enter the weight that you might think you would enter. You don't enter it with a decimal point. Notice also this one is actually called out with, for example, whereas the previous ones were just such as, or I think the first one didn't even use a little phrase. So those are all types of inline examples. And I'm going to skip that one. The next type of example that I like to think of is, I call them short examples. They're actually longer than the inline examples typically. And they're usually called out explicitly with some kind of heading that indicates that they are an example. These ones I think are maybe the most fun type of example to create. I find them fun to create. And I think they're perhaps the most meaningful for readers of content. So this is one, the title there says Example Comparison of Tax Calculations. So right off the bat, you know that this is some horrid topic talking about tax calculations. And by the time the reader is down to this section, they're probably already pulled out their hair trying to understand all this. So this example, again, tries to make it concrete. And here, again, it's a bit hard to see, but the first line says, Maya and Gabriel both live in the same region and both have online stores. The region has a tax rate, blah, blah, blah. And then each bullet says, the first one says, Maya doesn't include taxes in her prices, so here's how it's calculated. And then the second one says what this other person does. And so what this is doing is it's kind of introducing like a miniature story. And again, Rory talked about people love stories. And here we're introducing, two, well, they're not real people, but they're realer than just saying a business owner lives here and has this tax rate. So by using an actual name, it makes it sort of story-like, and I think a little bit more tangible and meaningful for the reader. Similarly, sometimes you'll see examples where writers will talk about, say, product A and product B, or something is being done to item X, Y, Z. I don't like those types of examples because then you're sort of leading them on by saying it's an example, but then using these abstract sort of variables, A, B, C, or X, Y, Z, to pull them back up again. So if you're going down to that lower level, let's actually talk about real concrete things. And here, we didn't do that, so that's too bad. It would have been good if they talked about an actual product they sold. Maybe it was edited out. Now here's a slightly longer example. This is I don't want to go into what the feature is about really, but it's basically creating a container, making a set of products. And in the Shopify product, that's actually kind of a complex thing. And that's why this example was created. Again, it's a bit too hard for you probably to read at the back, but you can see here there's a table. We're listing some products. It's going in, it's a bit of a story about someone who has a clothing store, lists off some of the items they're selling, belts, hats, and other accessories, and has a little sort of miniature reason for creating the collection. So again, latching onto that story idea and having those much more concrete elements to make it more tangible. Now, as you can see, these examples, I'm calling these short examples, but it's actually getting quite lengthy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. This is one other example of short example. This is in a bulleted list, and the concepts in each bullet are a little bit abstract. So this one, you can see it's learning about your customers and market. And the first paragraph, again, is pretty abstract. And then this whole second paragraph makes it much more tangible, talking about someone who wants to sell shoes and what they're going to have to do. So again, it makes that shortcut or leap from the abstract to the concrete. So those were getting pretty long, but of course you can make really long examples. And this is an example of one of those. We don't have very many in the Shopify Help Center because this is taking up the whole screen, and it's only the very start of that example. It's full of screen captures and steps to actually get to these various windows and so on, where you enter the values, and it's very detailed. So I've sort of been implying that, well, detail is good, but once you start getting into too much detail, I think you run the risk of losing a bunch of your audience. Only someone who's really interested in these very detailed steps is going to carry through the entire example. So this is where we run a risk of getting too much into the weeds. It's not really a problem of just being concrete. The concreteness is good, but the detail is just getting too much. And this is an example of something that we actually never did publish. It was a tutorial, which is kind of a complicated, long example. But we didn't publish this. To actually go through the tutorial was going to take quite a long time. There's a huge time commitment in creating it. It would introduce a lot of maintenance issues because if any feature of the product changes, then this example has to change. You have, of course, localization issues, translation costs, and so on. So once you get into these big tutorials and long examples, you really have to perhaps put a halt to things sometimes and address it in some other way. So those are the three types of examples. There are other types of examples. For example, visual examples can be included, of course. They're great. Screenshots are examples, but I won't go into those. Now, I did touch a little bit on the problems with long, extensive, and complicated examples. There are some other caveats and gotchas that we should talk about too. So we don't want to use obscure names or weird names in examples. So here, it's technically a perfectly valid example. It's set off with the for example, but I mean, someone is probably just trying to make a joke using Walla Walla. Also, most people probably know what a city name is, so the example is probably kind of useless in the first place. If you were to require an example there using a standard, common city like Paris or Toronto or something like that, might be more appropriate. This is an inline example gone haywire. So you can add any kind of product to your online store, such as electronics, clothing, sporting goods, cooking supplies, children's toys, unicorn sparkles, and pirate dioramas for aquariums. Now, of course, this is ridiculous. No one would actually write that. But you do have to make your examples, especially inline ones, pretty concise. You want to get to the point and move right along. Whoops. And the last one here is just an example of giving a date. You'll sometimes see this with dates or times. You want to have it a realistic date or time. So here it's giving an example of July 4th, 2118, which again, it should be a valid year unless we all vanish. But a more realistic date would be something like maybe July 4th, 2019 or 2020, something in the near future. So to wrap up then, I think examples are really helpful. They can shortcut the understanding of abstract concepts and make them concrete and tangible. And we should include them and hopefully turn farm assets into Bessie. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much. So again, if anyone would like to have any questions or any comments for Christopher, now would be a great time. Or you could come say hi afterwards as well, prefer. Thanks.
I guess the key there is to find just the right amount of example, right? Not too much and not too little. That's always my fear about giving examples, but then I'm sort of telling, this is what you're going to use the thing for. Maybe that's like stems from the fact that I write API docs, and I've been doing it for so long that like developers will do a million different things with an API that you never expected that they would do. And so it's something like when you're documenting something, if you're too specific about like, here's what you use the API for, then it's almost like you're leading them down. You're telling them that like happy path that I was talking about earlier is this thing, when that may not be like the intended thing. So you kind of need to kind of abstract it and then sort of like know how to introduce the examples in the appropriate way. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic. So thanks again for that. All right, so let's go back into Andrew's foray into presenting Google Slides presentations at Write the Docs. Oh yeah, before I do that, I need to escape from here. Present now. All right, so it's getting on for 7:30. And okay, present to everyone. Okay, you can do this, Andrew. Don't blow this. All right, awesome. It's happening. Yeah, I know this is a lot of talking at you happening here tonight, and a lot of shoppy folk talking at you. Yeah, we love obviously hearing from everyone else. So that's something that we sometimes do, is that we'll send out little messages about, oh, we're going to cover such and such a topic, and if you're interested in participating, feel free to reply to this message or fill out this Google form or whatever. So yeah, if there's ever anything that you guys are interested in talking about here, like please feel free to reach out on Meetup, because yeah, we love to kind of open this up to not only our people at Shopify and our remote presenters, but you guys from the local tech writing community that come out. And also on the topic of not being talked at, but talking in a group, I'd be up for going out to Brown Social House or some other local pub after this tonight. So if there's anyone else here that is up for continuing the discussion in a less formal manner, come say hi afterwards, and maybe we can all, maybe some of us can go do that. But I'm sure you're all asking, what the heck is Andrew going to talk about tonight? I don't even know what I'm doing up here. How did it come to this? I guess because it's Halloween sort of soon. I've got kids, so we talk about Halloween for half the year anyway. I think we're going to go as Kiss this year. Like the original Kiss. So my son's going to be Gene Simmons because he's like really into the tongue sticking out thing. I think I'm going to be the Peter Criss with the cat makeup. My daughter, who's 2, is going to be Ace Frehley. I don't know why, just because. And my wife is Paul Stanley. No, in real life, my wife is Paul Stanley. Right. Yeah, so this is actually going to be a talk about finding your confidence as a technical writer. It can be scary at times, but with a little self-belief and support from the right resources, it can be fun, like Stephen King. Why Stephen King? Well, actually, Stephen King was the first writer that I took like a keen interest in my life as a youth. He was the first person where I kind of just got turned on by like the power of words, and this whole kind of world opened up to me. And like he had all these books, and like he wrote a lot, and I was part of the Stephen King book club. So I would actually get like hardcover books mailed to me like every month. And I would also get these like newsletters written by Stephen King, and they would be like signed by him at the bottom. But it was like, you could tell it was like, an ink printed signature, but it still, it felt cool, like, yeah, Stephen King is writing me these letters. I'm reading all these books about crazy dogs that are attacking families. And I don't know, I must have been about 12 or something. So I think also like recently we've been doing a lot of focus on more technical stuff. Like I read about APIs, so I noticed that the last 3 meetups were like super technical, all like talking about APIs and stuff. And so I thought maybe we should like reconnect with what is our core discipline. So that was the idea behind the event tonight, was to talk about writing. And that's why I was so happy to get Christopher and Rory to be a part of this. So yeah, it's easy to forget at the end of the day that we actually like are writers. and what is kind of special and important and unique about that in the world today. So yeah, even though I work in software, at the end of the day, I'm fundamentally a writer. So this talk asks the question, are there lessons to be learned from the person that arguably started me down the path to becoming a writer? And what has sustained me along this path? All right. So I'm going to go into some general areas of writerliness here and pontificate a little bit. And, well, hopefully not pontificate too much, but more just talk about my journey and things that I find useful and things that are helpful for me. And if they're helpful for you guys too, then all the better. So yeah, one of the things that, so backing up just a second, I recently have been kind of getting on a little bit of a journey of style guides. Rory had mentioned it earlier in his talk about Dreyer's guide, and I've also been reading that recently, thanks to Rory. And then from there, I started kind of reading other style guides, and then this one popped up, and I started reading, and it really wasn't what I was expecting. There is definitely stuff in there about like writing and how to make it as a writer, but there's a lot more stuff in there about that resonates with just like life in general and being a writer of any kind than I had initially thought. And I would say one of the main through lines in this work is like the importance of story, and how what you want to do is you want to get that down first, and then you can go back and worry about things like symbolism, themes, and all of that. And I think that can be something that can hold people back. I also write songs, and I know that can sometimes be a bit daunting when you're writing lyrics to songs, is being like, well, I'm not Bob Dylan. I don't know how to reference the Bible in like a really cool way. So like, can I even call myself a songwriter? If you can take some characters and like move them along a narrative and get them from point A to point B, you can be a songwriter. And I think you can also be a writer, and you can also be a technical writer. Like, I think the thing that holds people back about technical writing is like, I'm not a developer. I don't know about, parameters and objects and arguments and this sort of stuff. But like, if you can talk about Bob and Mary and Sean and Melissa, and they all have to do this thing, and they have to start here and go there, and you can talk about arguments and objects and properties, and they're also in a dance and doing sort of things. And there's a beginning state and an end state, and there's an outcome. So yeah, I think focusing on the story is the most important thing. So if you don't need all of those like hard specialist technical skills to make it as a tech writer, well, what do you need? I would argue that you need communication skills. And I just kind of jotted some things down that I found over the course of my career have been kind of like the core discipline of what we do as tech writers. So chunking is a big one, which is like learning how to take this whole story, because that's what's happening, is that everyone is telling you a story. Product managers, software developers, people in marketing, whatever, they're all throwing this stuff at you, and there's a story in there. And your job is to sort of sift through it and put it in the right order, and then validate it and test it that is actually legitimately the story that the company wants to tell. And then, yeah, you're the person that gets to tell that story to the world. It's a pretty amazing job. Writing procedures. So again, like learning how to sort through this myriad of stuff that gets dropped in your table and turn it into the proper sequence. And presenting information like visually or in ways that is not, to go back to what Rory was saying, like a wall of text, right? So you learn about writing shorter paragraphs and, good introductory sentences and using tables and diagrams. And it's kind of interesting when you're faced with all of this complicated technical information, and then you sort of start to imagine it turning into a table in your mind. And you're like, how many columns would it have? And would I have to make some of these cells like, you have to like divide cells to make them into subcells? And was that going to work? And you start to do it, and then you feel very proud of yourself, if you're me. I always found like Microsoft things like Excel and like, I don't know, Microsoft Word like really intimidating. Like they could just do so many things. I just be like, man, like, do I need to learn all of Excel in order to feel good about myself? no, just make a few little tables. It feels great. And also diagrams. Like I'm no Picasso or whatever, but like I love thinking visually. It's the best. And I love when I get when I'm like trying to document something, I'm like, oh, I think we're gonna need a diagram here. And I whip out my little Liffy or whatever tool it is that I use in the cloud. I'm like, and I got all my old ones there. That's what I love about these services. You pay $20 a month for or whatever. All your stuff is there. You don't have to worry about some hard drive and what folder was it in again. And you can go and you can just make a neat little picture. There's actually some really great talks at Write the Docs in Portland this year about drawing and like visual communication and like cartooning and stuff, and how you can use that to kind of describe technical information. And a really neat tool called Mermaid, which I'm kind of obsessed with right now. So we'll see. Maybe we'll be doing a talk about Mermaid before too long. Yeah, and some like basics of HTML on the web and coding as a practice. So when I say coding as a practice, I don't mean like, yes, I was just fooling you. No, you actually do need to code. All that nice stuff I was saying earlier was all lies. You need to learn all of the languages, every single one of them. No, but just like building it into your life as something that you do, like, I don't know. I'm trying out this thing where I'm focusing more on like recurring, whatever we call them, practices in my life rather than like these set goals. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna code twice a week. So I just figure out like when do I have some time to do that, and I just kind of build it into my schedule. And I don't have any like specific things. I'm just like slowly over time trying to level up the kind of general technical sophistication, right? I think that in this day and age, regardless of whether you're a writer or whatever, I think that's probably a desirable outcome. So yeah, in terms of like chunking and writing procedures and tables and all that, you probably want to have one of these things around. This is probably the go-to one for a lot of people. There's other ones. They're like those like, you know, big reference tomes about how to tech write. So, you know, this has been my go-to. There's a copy of this in the library here in the Docs pod. For the coding as a practice, I'm really into Code Academy. I really like it because it has this like interface where you can do a little bit of coding, but it's like really, really simple. Like they start you off really, really simply. And if you get stuck, there's like hints. And then if you still get stuck, there's links to the forums. And there's like a pretty active user base. So there's people in there talking about solutions. And then if you still can't get it, you can just like populate the solution. That's one of the things that I found like the most frustrating about learning coding is like getting a book and getting really excited about it. And then it's like, try this exercise. And you try it and you can't get it. And you feel like a total failure. And then you go on Stack Edit or Stack Exchange or whatever. And,
Stack Overflow.
Sorry?
Stack Overflow.
Stack Overflow. There's so many stacks. Like I didn't notice that. Like, are they all the same website masquerading as different sites? I don't know. I don't get it. I'm signed up to so many sites. It's really crazy. Yeah, that's like my browser just from doing work today. It always looks like that. And half the day I'm closing browser windows. Half the day I work, the other half of the day I close those windows. And that's the end of the day. That's how it didn't work out for me. But yeah, so then you go on the stack and the answer to your problem is not there and you just feel crestfallen inside. I'm a deeply troubled soul. My son said that the other day. It was really weird. It's a long digression, but he has this dinosaur that you can record stuff into. Like you go, roar, and then you can play it back, and it goes roar. Like it says whatever you say, but like lower pitched. So the other day he's like, I'm a deeply troubled soul. I'm a deeply troubled soul. He's 6. Raising kids in 2019. I don't know. He goes on YouTube. Maybe that's the problem. But yeah, so this thing is great because it's just a lot of hand holding, and I need that. That's what I need. If Andrew Johnston's going to learn how to code, he needs a lot of hand holding. And it also, you can just go in it and do it for a little bit. If you have 5 minutes, you have 7 minutes, whatever. You're like, I'm done. And it just remembers your progress and knows where you were, where you are. like I hate having to take responsibility for myself, and so it's really hard for me to like work on some coding, and then like, where was I? What was I working on? Yeah, but this thing it remembers all that. So anyway, if you're lazy and have low self-esteem like me, you might like Code Academy in school. There's also one specifically for writers by Peter Gruenbaum. That is another one that would be of interest. It's about JavaScript, which is like a good starter language. Okay, quick little case study about still on the topic of like technical stuff, and I can't do that because it's too intimidating, and I'm saying no, you can do it. There is a way. So I read about APIs. I don't have a background in software development. The cool thing about APIs is that they're code agnostic. So they're actually like they're meant to work regardless of whether there's code involved or not. And really, like all they really are is like a thing that you need to learn the shape of them. Like, how do you query the API? If you send some stuff, what's going to come back? How do you manipulate the data? So really, all you need to know to be an API docs writer is you need to learn how to use a REST client, like Postman or Insomnia. And then beyond that, there's a bunch of pretty good courses and stuff out there to get you going. Gruenbaum's got a bunch of great courses on Udemy that you could check out if API writing is something that you're thinking of getting into. I remember before I started at Shopify, I didn't know anything about GitHub and pull requests. So that would probably be a good one there if you're like me. And nor did I know anything about Swagger and OpenAPI spec. So there's some really good stuff there. There's Tom Johnston's I'd Rather Be Writing blog, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And he's got like a whole course in there all about documenting APIs. And I still go on there sometimes. When we were working on our API doc style guide, I was Googling around and his site pops up a lot. So there was a bunch of little thorny things that I solved by going through some of his materials. And API clients, the reigning champion is Postman, but this other one, Insomnia, I think it's cooler because I noticed like all the cool kids at Shopify are like, oh no man, I don't use Postman, I use Insomnia. So maybe try that one. It also works with GraphQL, and I don't think that Postman has GraphQL support yet, although I could be wrong. It does? They did it.
That's long.
Oh, long ago. Okay.
Like a few months ago, I did.
Oh, okay. See, I'm 41. Long ago is like 5 years to me. 2 months ago, I don't even know. Was 2 months ago? That's the thing. I don't even know if I feel like that was a long time ago or a short time ago. Yeah, having 2 kids. One of them is less than 2 years old. I don't even know. I'm having an out-of-body experience right now. An out-of-body experience. Okay, so that was the end of that section about technical sophistication. You can do it, and this one is all about grammar. So tell me a story that makes sense. So I'll tell you a little story about how terrible at grammar I am. I once, when I was living in Montreal, tried to get a job teaching English as a second language, and they're like, okay, so as part of the job interview, it was crazy. I felt like I was on a reality TV show. It was like all of these like wannabe like English teachers. We all assembled in this corporate kind of environment, and then we all had to get up and do kind of like this and like talk about grammar or whatever. And I'm like, let's talk about possessives. So when you want to show that something belongs to it, you put the apostrophe S, and that means that it belongs to. And I remember when I was doing that, like I was looking out and everyone was like, I'm like, what? That's right? I'm a native speaker. I know I've got this language down pat. And I did have to Google that today just to double check. Sure. It's actually a contraction, right? It's a contraction. I was hoping for a little applause there. So I figured out. Thank you. But I think we can often feel scared and overwhelmed about grammar because we have these like flashbacks to traumatic experiences from high school. And like I think in my head, I always thought to myself, like, I need to learn all of the grammar, all of the rules, or I'm nothing, you know? Like one day people are going to find me out that I don't know the whole itemized list of all the grammar rules that were ever written. But it turns out that there's a different way that you can approach your life. And I call it going from words to rules, not rules. You don't need to learn all the rules and then try to apply them. Look at the words that are in front of you, then figure out what rules apply to those words, and then put those into practice. So on grammar, the words to rules thing, I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. Something else that I call the common errors approach, my greatest hits, and then this wonderful thing that I discovered called sentence diagramming. So when I started with my words to rules approach, I would get stuck on something. Like if I was doing a PR review, somebody was like, "Hey, edit this for the English," and I'd be like, "I don't know English." So it'd be like I would just Google like a thing if I didn't remember, So like sort of like as you need to know the information, you can just Google it and find it, and then you can apply it. Don't have a cow, man. And then from there, I got into this Judy Steiner-Williams course on grammar, and it was really cool because she was like, "Yeah, like we're not going to go and learn everything about grammar. We're going to just look at the common errors of grammar." And she did that by going through the parts of speech and sort of like, here's the different parts of speech that make up the language, and here's like the common grammatical errors that everyone makes, even like the native speakers of English. And it was in there. It was in there, and I felt very validated by that. So yeah, I was like, yeah, study the common errors, and then like, what are my common errors? That was the next thing. Was that like, what are I called them my greatest hits, and I started compiling a list in my OneNote notebook, which is something that I can't live without. Don't ever try to take away my OneNote notebook. My life will crumble. So I call it my greatest hits. And basically what it is a bunch of stuff from Rory's PR reviews. And Tom couldn't be here with us tonight. Tom is my current editor. But every time they point something out in a PR review, I just like stick it in this note, and it just becomes this long list of things, mistakes that I know that I make all the time. And then from there, I was like, whoa, like we can take this to like the next level and be like, let's get into sentence diagramming, which is like all about knowing the parts of speech and then like putting them into this like diagram form where you start to see the structure of language and how like language is really just code running in the matrix and it all is interconnected. And I thought that was really cool. You just take it for granted, like growing up speaking English at home, reading English books. It doesn't even look like anything to you, but it is actually like neat. Everything is a thing. Like everything in a sentence has a name and it has a job. And like, what are these things and what jobs do they do? And what are the rules that are related to those things? So now, when I get stuck on some thorny like grammar English thing when I'm reviewing something, I'm like, well, what part of speech is it? And what are the rules associated with that part of speech in this context? And I feel much more capable. So anyway, that's been making me happy. Okay, editing. Shining up. No, nobody. Shining up your prose. Editing. Shine it up. Make it better. So whenever I have to edit my own work, or God forbid, edit somebody else's work, I still to this day feel pangs of imposter syndrome. When I feel that I'm not up to the task, my grasp of grammar isn't good enough, or I won't be able to apply the rules of style and tone consistently. I look at the chunks of text on the screen before me, and I thrust my head back and let out a blood-curdling scream. They're all gonna laugh at you. No, it turns out there's a different way. I call it separation of concerns. So rather than getting overwhelmed by trying to analyze and correct everything at once, we can pull apart things into their component parts and then follow a predictable, repeatable process, because words are like systems. So separation of concerns. For example, you can see this kind of approach in your company style guide if you have one. And if you don't have one, you need to make one. Like at Shopify, we chunk things out into general writing principles, organization and structure, language and grammar, punctuation and special characters, and formatting. So rather than trying to review somebody's work and just like, I have to review the words, they have to be right, I break things out into these different passes. So like I'll do like a general content review just to make sure that things don't seem erroneous to me. Then I can look at maybe some like grammar and make sure that comma rules are being applied, and then I'll do like a pass for terminology, making sure that we're, yep.
How do you spell separate?
I don't know. Well, that's not the right way. Is there S-E-P-A-R?
There it is.
Yeah.
Separate.
Okay, all right. I'm still a failure after all these years.
I thought that was a test.
Oh, yeah. I could have. I'll do that. The next time I give this talk, I'll like put like a little emoji up there going. Yeah. Separation of concerns. And I noticed as I kept researching into this that other people, like Aaron Rickard, they also have this idea of separation of concerns. So check the content of the message, check the mechanics, check the style and tone, check the format. Don't try to do everything all at once. You're just going to give yourself a big headache, and that's not good. And so I started building that into my little notebook that I take with me everywhere, where I have my little links to vocabulary. Some of those are from our Polaris style guide, which is another Shopify style guide. Some of them are to our help center. And I have some style and voice stuff and some format, and it keeps going and going. Believe me, this goes on much over the page. And if worst comes to worst, you should always just ask yourself, well, what would NASA do? Because when I want to edit a little couple of paragraphs of language, I want to know how the Jet Propulsion Laboratory would do it, because that's the kind of nerd that I am. So the Jet Propulsion Laboratory published this thing in 1976, which is called the Levels of Edit. And it's basically taking this whole separation of concerns thing. I was just about to like pop out of my presentation to edit that spelling mistake, but I'm not that slick. It's basically taking that concept to the next level. So when you do an edit, only the most substantive, because some of the space science documents are just not that substantive. Only the most substantive documents at NASA get like a full level 1 edit, and like other ones will just get like a level 5 document would just get like a coordination edit. And there's a whole list of what does a coordination edit mean versus what is a policy edit. And there's like a differentiation between what is format and what is style. And they've even helpfully pointed out like what they believe the difference between format and style is as applies to these different areas in a typical document. So you can go pretty far down this whole rabbit hole of separation of concerns if you want, or you can keep it pretty simple. Of course, you have to have one of these around, but also consider having one of these around. And there's a bunch of other ones. I think they're just nice to have around. Especially this one, it's just, well, both of them, they're like a joy to read. The tone of them is fun. They don't feel like these big, heavy tomes about grammar or whatever. They're just kind of amusing, but they're useful. And I find myself reaching for them when I'm kind of stuck on something. All right, so we're almost there. So my last section is about owning it. You are part of the 5%. So at the end of the day, we all take our tools and techniques and resources and put them into our big bag of bones, or our toolboxes, as Stephen King would call them. And then we go out to the world and try to make it as writers. And as Stephen King has shown, the world can be a scary place, populated with knife-wielding clowns, pets that come back alive and kill us, and bloodthirsty dogs that will try to kill you and your family. So what's the upside here? Well, take heart. You're part of a special group that uses words to make a living. According to Stephen King, there are thousands of talented writers at work in America, and only a few of them, I think the number might be as low as 5%, can support their families and themselves with their work. And I say that not to try to, scare you or scare you off technical writing if you're just getting into it, but I think we often can take our skill sets for granted in this profession, especially in technical docs and writing about software where, docs always come last, docs come at the end, and a lot of people don't necessarily see their value. But I think the fact is that, and I think it's easy to lose track of this, the fact is that what we do is actually a pretty rare talent. And I think it's pretty cool to be a tech writer. And postscript, I would say that the writer that first captured my imagination as a boy and got me into writing has probably also had something to say to me now as I guess I'm an adult. And in addition to reminding us about the importance of story and that great quote, which I find really inspiring, the book on writing is also filled with many amusing and inspiring anecdotes and lots of great life lessons, and I would highly recommend it. And I guess I'll just leave you on this quote. I found it very, very moving. Maybe you'll enjoy it too. Put your desk in the corner, and every time you sit down there to write, remind yourself why it isn't in the middle of the room. Life isn't a support system for art. It's the other way around. So, yeah. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say on the matter. Well, thanks so much for being here. And I know I went kind of way over. I just sort of did a brain dump of everything I wanted to say today. So feel free to flag me down if you want to talk about anything from the talk, or if anybody wants to go get a drink, I'd be up for that too. And otherwise, thanks again for being here, and hope to see you at future editions of Write the Docs. And let's thank Christopher Clunas and Rory Tanner for being here tonight. And sticking to the 15 minutes, like I did not. Well, in my defense, we were also going to have time for other lightning talks, but nobody signed up. So I had to do something to fill the time. And also let's thank Hallie and Pat and the other people that are the Write the Docs volunteers that make this all kind of happen here at Shopify. So thank you, Hallie. Thank you, Pat. All right, cool. See you around. Cue music. We're working on having music at like various strategic times. Cue music.
Oh, it was good, eh? Oh, thanks. I'm glad. Oh, it's a application. Oh, okay. Yeah. Like I said, it's all just.
Nice to meet you. You guys going over
It's just
your
another thing.
Yeah, but I enjoyed it.
I don't know.
Well, right
Yeah, for sure.
I have a dog, and I had to
What your needs, what
like work, like making it here, and it's like so I understand.
I think it's actually interesting. He doesn't grade his
Forgot my
Where were you live? You left work early.
I went to eat dinner. Well, like make dinner and then eat it up.
Yeah, well, like he does a lot of.
Nice.
Where was you?
Titus.
He kind of lets the
Coming out.
Yeah,
You make classified software, so
designer.
so things like
See that our work
Yeah.
as a company.
restricted,
No, I know. I'm so heavily flawed. Actually, I think the idea of writing a novel is still the idea. Because the way I would approach it
long
was
time now.
like,
How about you guys?
I'm not listening.
no,
Just trying to like get your.
plots, and then just kind of like throw in some, okay, so role of the red herring.
I wrote it down and I put a lot of images and a lot of videos.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I enjoyed it. You know what? Yeah. If
Yeah.
no one's gonna do that, good.
Like,
So, okay, that was a cool journey. It flopped the first version. They updated because they updated.
I went to school for
Okay, awesome.
A lot of things that details, and I was like,
Okay.
other places.
But it was rare to find somebody who actually went to.
Oh yeah,
It is okay to.
it's a miracle that you.
Because I
I started
guidelines.
Are you a writer?
I do UX, so research and strategy.
Well, that's way.
I
I'm jealous.
started off.
You know,
It's a tough
Time for you. Yeah, no, for sure.
When is
Part of
Yeah, yeah. Like making time to like do user research and like doing something more than once. Like I do UX tests with my software that I build, and it's basically just like Shayna put a sentence here. I'm like, oh, how about this one? It's very
Slapped together.
yeah.
That's a lot like
just
ours. We don't even acknowledge.
Megan wrote all that content there, and I like made it to the off and had me to do it.
It's more about like
wrote it all.
Yeah. But then like that's your first step in website content, and
and over time,
not very empathetic.
you start
No, exactly. So
Yeah.
you'll
It
write
was all
something and then
smart.
it's like, oh, but you really have to use
I kind of like I often
like maybe when you're
Oh my God, this is we have to start off.
Is it like a
Yeah, like like documents.
It's not exactly.
It's a small company.
Yeah.
The classic tech writing.
Yeah.
See your work become out of
Are you all the way out in Canada?
It's and
We're still all the way out.
but it's really cool. And as a designer,
yes,
Yeah.
it's true. It depends where you're coming
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where's Titan?
It's on Preston. It's in like the building
Yeah,
with
well, it's sort of
Adobe.
changing over time.
Okay.
Floors below. Yeah, yeah. It's not
in
bad.
writing, so I was like, oh God, I cheated, so I
I don't want to work
went to
anywhere.
flag.
But like,
Oh my God.
Or like I don't. I also
But
don't.
I was like, how
I
dated?
wanna work more.
Get a copy.
Yeah.
No, I feel like
a lot of
like software companies usually
that's
do
really cool.
that.
changes to the customer
Drive.
Yeah.
Customer lives.
Telework, right?
Yeah.
If I get really good, like,
Companies that like
everyone, like, everyone, you go into PR, more that's like website,
Oh, that's
so
really
like,
good.
mind
Like,
you,
oh, yeah. And they're like,
just make sure.
oh, that was actually
The writer, I can help you with my goal, like I.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You probably have.
I mean, nothing like launches.
Yeah, I feel like that'd be super hard. The only reason I know anything about what's
I mean, one of the things
That are writing out there.
to every meeting, I'm like, telling things.
set up like learn Dash.
Telework, you can do it.
WordPress running.
I don't find the appeal of doing it all the time. One day a week, and taking that 5 days.
Products.
I also really want to learn it.
So
The country.
Yeah.
Or
there was
like
again like writing.
children.
Because they're developers.
Yeah.
Not
Those
teach
Really good.
all
Stuff like
kinds of
that.
various
A lot of
Be like one of those Instagram
Yeah.
Their laptop,
latte and Barcelona or whatever. Yeah.
I feel like those people aren't actually.
Let's see.
We always.
Coding. So
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
if you were logged in, I can
But
give
it's
you.
also like a lot of
If you're logged in
Wow.
Rio, you're giving content about a couple people. So that's really cool because you can work with this.
There's maybe not for me.
So
A lot of people will like
Facilitate that.
they'll apply for
first
jobs.
one, then you find it.
Yeah.
Option B.
Define certified Shopify.
So we did that.
They have like
Okay. Yeah, nice to meet you. Hi, yeah, Will. I said hi. I already said hi to you. Sorry. Rena. Okay. Right. Definitely. Remember that forever and see you all the time. It's fine.
Personality. So with writing and we can write to each. So writing. So what I do is
I don't think there's any.
It's really cool. We did that course kind of with merchants.
There is a merchant.
I have to rewrite everything. All right. Write a job description.
But I mean, it was all experiential. Stuff.
Hey Rory. Do you remember what the
the meetup that happens on the 8th floor is called?
Yeah. Something like
Local
that.
talks?
Local talks? Yeah, and then.
We just
Is that like
included
for merchants?
You know what? I met people on the way up talking about it, but I don't know anyone.
Yeah. I thought you were I think it's called local talks. It happens on Tuesdays. That happens at the same time.
We just wrote 4 concepts.
It's on the 8th floor.
I think there's a sign about it in the lobby.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there was a sign, but it definitely said local talks on it, and was like.
And that's all the information.
Yeah.
Just the name.
Yeah.
So you can go down there on the 8th floor and you can check it out because the 8th floor is like the
Oh my goodness.
main
And I'm like, I'm looking at this is what's available.
And I did
Countries send me this.
section.
A little bit.
So you can go down there.
No,
But
You can still go in.
I really wanted to be an editor.
Well, thanks for coming.
Oh, yeah.
Good luck with your store.
It'd be pretty fun.
Hi,
It's just
I'm Shayna, nice to meet you.
Yes.
So, you had this huge presentation, and it was all about, like, your Stephen King books all through, and I never said.
Yeah.
For several years.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you read them all?
I don't know. I think I read like maybe like I was like 10. So I probably read like the first half.
Okay, so I'm reading it right now, so I'm like really like deep, because the audio was so like commuting and stuff.
But I kept all the
Always
editing
available.
for
Great.
and it looks like a really cool.
I like to see
It was great. It's my favorite. I have a friend on writing.
It's a quick read.
Yeah, is it thinner?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's. I mean, I don't read.
Like modifiers in a passive sense, and like converting it to active as confusing. It teaches you how to like put some in the closet.
I got
and
into
then it's really cool.
I haven't read that one.
Oh my God, this is so cool. And then I read that zone,
Editing for
and then I realized
one of those.
they actually made a film.
I can post a picture of it. There's a meetup group here by but it's really great.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I gotta see
I
that.
got my note because I don't know if that's the name.
Yeah, that's the best time.
Yeah,
So it's really
Especially like.
yeah, but spoiler, it's
Different.
Yeah, I went to I recently just like going back to
Yeah, I was actually reading like
no in the government.
it sounds like what should happen with Trump, right? Like, some like good guy in the US.
That's
just
cool.
be like, oh, that's not enough use for it. And everyone would be like, we're not gonna put him in jail. We can't just,
You know,
what he's going.
it's a relatable because I'm from Brazil.
We all hate our president. Like the new guy?
No one likes it. No one likes it. We're like, oh my God, he's so crazy. I'm so ashamed.
Oh, well, we're all ashamed.
Yeah, great.
So you works at.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it.
At
That's my shirt.
But it's a pipeline in that context.
I think it's like the structure of.
Yeah, you know, you were talking about.
Because you're animating like TV.
I was telling you.
So it would be the
I'm not a tech
script to the models to the background.
while it was
to whatever.
writing, I used a key to
I used like a lot of
But it needed putting in Python, so.
I also use a tool called Grammarly.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, that was so cool, man. But yeah, really?
I wish I could use the
Yeah,
Asian
yeah.
version, but it's too expensive.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm so, you know, they got a cheese product because they will give you like basic
the map.
basic stuff.
They want
But they have like a feature that says advanced whatever. It says like, oh, you have 15 currencies here, but you can see. So I'm like, oh my God, this sucks. It has like 15 currencies, whatever. I don't know. It seems like it runs on AI.
I think I saw something
It's probably fake. It's not real AI.
Some guy, like, at the Grammarly offices.
No, it's
As it really comes in.
So it's not like
I think I heard today that they announced that they tone now for a few years. Yeah, no, analyze your tone to make sure.
I mean, it's probably not fake, maybe not joking, but it's sad. Writing for, fun, be, funny. And so the great text
It's a very small
with
company.
that
It's a
in
very
mind.
small company. And so like no one really.
All kinds of, it's like probably a combination.
We're gonna need some friends.
Probably.
And then I guess the white labels are really.
As you're trying to do it.
Well, like Shopify was hired to organize.
I was kind of trying to sprinkle all my. Oh, it is. Been there for me when I was.
Right.
Well, truth be told, I probably don't do that, but I just like my brain is.
So anyway, after 4 years, I feel like wake up.
Just knowing that there's different. I think.
Yeah.
I feel like people want to highlight.
But I hope you don't feel like.
They fix the grammar. Style.
Yeah.
And I read it, just enjoying that all of this. It gives you like a framework.
Yeah. I feel like I have like
But it's almost like
I've only been there for maybe 6 months. Actual job.
Yeah.
But I've already been like for technical writing, and I'm constantly like
are good at
guessing like this is the best way to like set this up or
I
like.
didn't know how much I was
Does
taking
you constantly
for
like you constantly think
that one fateful day in
a lot?
Montreal.
Okay.
When I realized just how bad it was.
Yeah, and like
And that was after
I don't know. I feel like it's a rut.
university.
You're constantly questioning your responsibility for that stage. I don't know what people are theory does. Yeah,
I thought I was the king of writing.
No one really thinks about that.
Speak just
Fortunately, there's a ton of stuff that I don't know.
Oh, it is. They're only allowed to hire you for sure.
I think that for me,
So yeah. So I'm
English
looking
I ran the job bank for
this is kind of
right.
I was gonna say, do you have like a team there? I've never been a technical writer.
learning can be like
Yeah, they don't have the box
It
of
is.
things. It's probably why.
it's kind of different.
But it's
in
the
Portuguese we don't have usually
the
the
competencies
has taken, has taken form. Portuguese, it's kind of hard to know that
They're the same level. Yeah, it feels really weird. And they're like my friends who I was classmates with. So I'm getting kind of
You don't conceive of
to
time in the
organize
same
like
way.
Yeah, so it's
sometimes like on
And they
downtime
don't know
I try to
if I
organize
were to-
documents for the technical writers.
I would probably
My hobby though, I like programming.
oh my god, this is so obvious, but I can't just.
Like any particular language.
What is it?
Yeah.
What are the component parts? Right.
Above.
Not
No,
above,
it's okay.
like,
I was trying to do something else.
above where I thought.
More or less, we call it
There's
the cadence, we're taking some
Closure,
parts off,
there's
so we take the summers off. So I think we our last one.
and Closure script will actually
And then we take the summer
compile
off
to
as well.
JavaScript,
Okay.
and you can use all JavaScript libraries.
Yeah, I know.
From it, it's completely interoperable. So like, you can usually go with the string library in JavaScript installed. You can just literally do like it's required
Yeah.
content JS like / string whatever it's called, and it's easy as that, and then you can start abstracting that. So you don't have to do weird.
I was at the, well, I think a couple of them were,
My issue is closure. I like writing my application.
were selling API.
Oh, yeah.
You don't want that in the command script.
Crazy.
So there's
cool.
so you can now use the beauty of
Pretty sure
closure
Node
syntax.
This is the perfect time.
Yeah, you can use Node, like again, it'll run on nodes that are committed now. Yeah.
So I'm
I
on
like
a
a lot of lists because like they're
Great. It was really cool. Conceptually,
I like being able like instant feedback from writing. It's like JavaScript has like kind of like a drifter, like a REPL, but I really like
managers.
I had like a writing
I
center.
work all day.
Yeah, and I'll go. Yeah, where's
My
that?
back.
Okay.
So like I use the cast line.
Yeah.
And so
The front end is still hard because then you still have to
because they were only working on
Yeah.
the right now.
I feel like
They were building an entire without
compare that
Yeah.
damn
So
canvas and
Building
stuff.
the
And
API, you're
Yeah.
like, you have to be
Yeah.
and everyone had
Yeah.
I go back to the, I also.
First time I learned to like draw like on the JavaScript, I was like, oh, you can like kind of like an element.
Yeah. Just a lot of good.
So were you?
doing all that
None of this
school,
is actually
you
working.
can't
Yeah.
I relearned the beginning of React like 4 times, and I'm like, I know this.
On,
Yeah.
so
I have to go
the team that was doing the back end
So that could be.
I was in other pieces of software at my company,
Yeah,
they
so-
leverage
Gotcha.
operations
That's
that,
cool though. You don't have to deal with like the
It
dependencies
is.
and stuff.
It is
Right?
cool.
I love
they leverage what the
like
application builds to.
Yeah.
I can't write like a fish
Yeah,
out
they had
to
to
like highlight it
guide
to
themselves.
scratch.
So it was.
Yeah.
And also I get to get things.
So like internal docs.
Yeah.
Vanilla is really cool right now.
Yeah.
Internal
Just
docs.
starting it, starting it.
But
Started,
everyone
yeah.
wants to hire us.
I don't know all the, but I know
you.
it's an internal audience.
I got an email from Rob.
Okay.
I hear people talk about it all the time, and I've never sat down and
So
Googled
in
it.
mind,
and
it's like imagine if you.
Is the audience for developers?
It's just another. It's basically a list that runs on the job for
Yeah, and I just.
That's literally all it is. It's just another.
Is it
I
about
like
like
it.
coding
That is
practices?
Yeah.
Patterns
Patterns
and
and
patterns?
patterns is way nicer. Like, it's basically the exact same, but there's little nuances that I like that are like nicer. But yeah. Yeah, well, I never actually knew how to pronounce it. I always read it, and I never say it in my head. Yeah, so like, oh, Lumos. Sorry, I thought you were talking about LUA, like X and C language. So I was like, that's a functional language.
You don't know.
Yeah, Lumos.
Lumo. Okay, Lumo is the same thing.
Yeah, so think of like, like this idea for language.
Yeah.
Like someone starts on Shopify and there's different implementations of it. So one's the Java implementation, which is there's JavaScript, and then which runs your floater code on JS, so you can do for application.
We're just like forgetting our
It's just like an idea almost.
Yeah.
We implement it on different platforms.
Yeah, man. I was coding for fun. It was like, I'm gonna make a website with tables.
Yeah.
I was like 13. I feel like you're now like stuck on
Wow.
Have you ever thought of doing your own project?
Yeah, I am really into
Plug it right in.
I was trying to get that too. Actually, this is my blog.
I love the
Right now, I'm writing my HTML and I miss like
It's just not yet.
and like I was using
Instruction isn't.
I just yeah.
Like try to establish my environment here. I bought like new laptop and stuff.
I mean,
Just run it on YouTube pages or something.
well, yeah, but then you have to every time you wanna like build your page. And if you really wanna do it, I highly recommend GitLab.
I went to the doctor 3 times. I was
I
like,
can tell it install
it's so technical, it's so difficult.
compile my page,
And I'm not like a
compile it to test mode, in this case, compile this branch as a test.
I know like a
branch.
little bit of
It's very, very.
Have you ever like thought of using
What do you do? Like,
I mean, last year.
page instead of
I'm like team of one. We're all to our kind of
first name?
what kind of rights?
Okay, so like,
I was like, what kind of
okay, wow, that's a big deal.
No, it's not.
So you're gonna set the tone for the whole thing. That's the top.
But I used to use like
It's not really
path scripts that just use Pandoc to convert like some files. And then like so you can like string this together so you have like a shape and like a footer and then like a